I woke up in the ICU, and the first question the nurse asked was not about my pain. She asked who was coming to claim my baby. My parents lived 20 minutes away, yet they still refused to come. 3 hours later, my grandfather walked in holding a folder so thick it looked like a verdict, and the sentence he said next did not just change their tone, but it changed their future forever. My name is Savannah Phillips. I am 33 years old, and I am currently speaking to you from a place where time seems to stand still. I woke up in the ICU with the taste of metal in my mouth and a throbbing ache in my lower abdomen that felt like I had been cut in half. The sterile hum of machinery was the only sound in the room. I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion and the lingering fog of anesthesia. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of the last few hours. There was rain. There was the screech of tires. There was the terrifying sensation of spinning out of control. And then there was darkness. My first thought was not about my own pain or the stitches pulling at my skin. It was about the tiny life that had been inside me just hours before. I turned my head, ignoring the sharp spike of agony in my neck, and looked for a bassinet or a crib. The room was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the drug-induced haze. I pressed the call button, my fingers trembling. A nurse appeared almost instantly. She looked kind, with tired eyes and a soft demeanor, but when she looked at me, her expression shifted into something that terrified me more than the accident itself. It was pity. I asked the only question that mattered. I asked where my baby was. The nurse gently explained that my baby was safe. She told me that due to the trauma of the accident, they had to perform an emergency delivery. My son was in the NICU, stable but small, fighting for his breath in an incubator. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. He was alive. That was all that mattered. But then the nurse hesitated. She looked at the empty chairs beside my bed. She looked at the door, and then she asked the question that would unravel my entire world. She asked who was coming to claim my baby. She explained that the hospital needed a listed adult to coordinate care, to sign papers, to be there for the decisions that I was currently too incapacitated to make. She asked if my husband was close. She asked if my parents were on their way. I told her my husband, Noah, was on a flight. He was across the country at a conference and was racing back. But he was at least 5 hours away. But my parents lived 20 minutes away. Just 20 minutes. A drive I had made hundreds of times. The nurse nodded slowly. She told me that they had called the emergency contacts listed in my file. She said they had left messages. She asked if there was anyone else. The silence in the room became suffocating. I reached for my phone on the bedside table. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. I expected to see a flood of missed calls. I expected frantic texts from my mother asking if I was okay, telling me she was in the lobby, telling me she was with the baby. I unlocked the screen. There were 0 missed calls. There were 0 text messages from my father. There were 0 text messages from my mother. I opened social media, desperate for a distraction, or perhaps looking for a clue that maybe their phones were dead. Maybe there was a power outage. Maybe there was a logical explanation for this silence. The first thing that popped up on my feed was a photo posted 14 minutes ago. It was my sister, Talia. She was holding a cocktail, smiling widely at the camera, dressed in a shimmering dress that caught the light. The location tag was a high-end lounge downtown, less than 15 minutes from this hospital. The caption read simply, "Living my best life." I stared at the screen. The light from the phone blurred as tears filled my eyes. My sister was 15 minutes away, drinking cocktails, while I was stitched up in a hospital bed, wondering if my son was terrified and alone. But that was not the part that broke me. The part that broke me was the realization of what I had done to ensure their comfort. I need you to understand the context of this betrayal. I need you to understand that this was not a distant relationship. This was not a family that had drifted apart. For 8 years, I have been the financial backbone of my parents' lives. Every single month, on the first of the month, I transferred a specific amount to their joint account. It was not a gift. It was not a loan. It was an expectation. I sent them $4,800 a month. I want you to hear that number again. $4,800 every 30 days for 8 years. That is nearly $5,000 that I did not put into my own savings. That is money I did not use for vacations. That is money I did not use to buy a house sooner. That is money I faithfully sent, like rent to a family I did not live with, because I was told they needed it. I was told they were drowning. I was told that if I did not help, they would lose everything. I did it because I was the responsible one. I did it because I thought that was what love looked like. I thought love was sacrifice. I lay back against the pillows, the phone heavy in my hand. The nurse was still standing there, waiting for an answer. I told her to give me a moment. I called Noah. He answered on the first ring, and I could hear the background noise of an airport terminal. He sounded breathless, panicked. He told me he was boarding. He told me he loved me. And then his voice cracked. He told me he had called them. He told me that when the hospital first called him, 2 hours ago, he had immediately called my parents. He knew he could not get here in time, so he did the logical thing. He called the grandparents who lived 20 minutes away. He begged them to go to the NICU. He begged them to be there for their grandson until he could land. I asked him what they said. Noah went silent. I could hear the announcement for his flight boarding in the background. He did not want to tell me. He wanted to protect me from the truth while I was lying in a hospital bed. But I pushed him. I needed to know. He told me that my mother answered the phone. He told her I was in surgery. He told her the baby was being rushed to the NICU. And my mother, the woman to whom I have sent over $460,000 over the last decade, hesitated. She told him that they could not do this tonight. She told him they had plans. She said the baby would be fine there. She said hospitals are safe places, and there was no need for everyone to rush over and cause a scene. She said they were at a special event for my sister, and they could not just leave. I replayed those words in my head as I hung up the phone. We cannot do this tonight. We have plans. The words echoed off the sterile white walls. They bounced around the empty room where my family should have been. They mixed with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The baby will be fine there. My son was alone. He was hours old. He had been ripped from the safety of the womb into a chaotic world, and the only people in the world who could have sat beside him, who could have held his tiny hand, who could have whispered to him that he was loved, had decided that their plans were more important. They chose a cocktail lounge over the ICU. They chose my sister's vanity over my son's life. Something inside me fractured. It was not a loud break. It was a quiet, clean snap. It was the sound of a tether finally being cut. For years, I had convinced myself that their dependence on me was proof of their love. I thought they needed me. I thought that by saving them, I was earning my place in the family. I thought that if I just gave enough, if I just sacrificed enough, they would be there when I finally needed them. I was wrong. I was just an ATM with a heartbeat. I looked at the nurse. My eyes were dry now. The tears had stopped because sadness requires hope, and I had none left for them. I felt a cold clarity wash over me, sharper than the pain of the incision. I unlocked my phone again. I did not call them. I did not text them to beg. I did not scream. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the scheduled transfers tab. I saw the entry that was set to go out in 2 days. $4,800. Pending. I tapped the button that said, Cancel. The app asked me to confirm. It asked if I was sure I wanted to delete this recurring transfer. I pressed yes. Then I went to the history. I looked at the long list of completed transfers. Month after month. Year after year. A river of money flowing in one direction. I closed the app. 3 hours later, the door to my room opened. It was not my parents. It was not my sister. It was my grandfather. He walked in holding a folder so thick it looked like a verdict. He is 80 years old. A man who has seen more of life than I can imagine, and he walked with a cane. But tonight, he moved with a purpose that made him look 10 years younger. He did not look at the machines. He did not look at the nurse. He looked straight at me. His eyes were filled with a fierce, protective sorrow. He walked to the side of my bed and took my hand. His grip was warm and solid. He told me I was not alone anymore. Then he placed the folder on the tray table. It made a heavy thud. He told me he had stopped by my parents' house on the way here. He told me he knew they were not here. He told me he knew exactly where they were, and then he told me what he had said to them. He did not yell. He did not beg them to come. He did not try to bargain with them to be decent human beings. My grandfather is not a man who bargains with terrorists, emotional or otherwise. He simply told them one sentence. He told them one specific fact that he had uncovered, a fact contained in the papers inside that folder. He told me that when he said it, the color drained from my mother's face. He told me my father dropped his glass. He told me that the music in their house seemed to stop. Even though no one turned it off, they went quiet. For the first time in 8 years, the constant stream of demands, excuses, and guilt trips went silent. My grandfather sat down in the chair that should have been occupied by my father. He rested his hand on the folder. He looked at me and told me that Linda and Dean, he used their first names, stripping them of the titles of mom and dad, were not just going to lose the money I had been sending. He said they were about to lose the story they had been telling everyone for a decade. I looked at the folder. I looked at my grandfather. And for the first time since I woke up, I did not feel weak. I felt the beginning of a fire. Before I tell you what was in that folder, and before I tell you exactly how my parents reacted when the truth came crashing down on their perfectly curated lives, I need to ask you something. I want to know where you are watching this from. I want to know what time it is where you are, because I need you to mark this moment. I need you to remember exactly where you were when you heard this story, because this is not just a story about money. This is not just a story about bad parents. This is a story about the exact moment you realize that the people you would die for are the ones holding the knife. My name is Savannah Phillips, and my parents refused to see my newborn son because they had plans, but they did not know that their plans were about to be canceled permanently. To understand why cutting that financial cord felt like cutting off a limb, you have to understand how the tether was attached in the first place. You have to understand that it did not start with a demand. It started with a whisper. It started with a lie so carefully constructed that it felt like a confidence shared between allies. We have to rewind the clock. We are going back 8 years. I was 25 years old. I remember exactly who I was at that moment. I was fresh-faced, ambitious, and I had just landed my first role as a senior account strategist at a marketing firm in the city. I remember the feeling of walking into my own apartment, a small, one-bedroom walk-up with creaky floors and a view of a brick wall, and feeling like I was the Queen of England. It was mine. The rent was paid with money I had earned. The refrigerator was stocked with food I had bought. I felt powerful. I felt stable. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, and the anxiety of my childhood, the constant low-level hum of worrying about bills, had finally gone quiet. That silence lasted exactly 3 weeks after my first promotion. It was a Tuesday evening. I was heating up leftovers and humming to myself, feeling that specific high that comes from looking at a bank balance that finally has a comma in it. Then my phone rang. The screen said, "Mom." I answered with a smile. I said hello. I was ready to tell her about my new office, about the client I had just signed, about the life I was building, but I never got the chance to speak. On the other end of the line, my mother was sobbing. It was not a soft cry. It was the terrified, ragged breathing of a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. My stomach dropped through the floor. The joy of the evening evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, familiar dread that every child of a chaotic household knows. I asked her what was wrong. I asked if everyone was okay. She could barely get the words out. She told me it was my father. She said he had a health scare. She did not give specifics. She threw out words like heart palpitations and stress tests and potential blockage. She made it sound immediate and life-threatening, but vague enough that I could not pin down a diagnosis. She said the doctors were running tests, but the insurance, She paused here for effect. The insurance was refusing to cover the diagnostics because of some bureaucratic error with the deductible. Then she pivoted. She moved from health to survival in the span of a single breath. She told me that because of the medical bills piling up from these sudden tests, they had missed a mortgage payment. Then, too, she told me the bank had sent a letter. She told me they were talking about foreclosure. I stood in my kitchen, clutching the phone, feeling the walls of my safe little life closing in. The thought of my parents losing the house I grew up in, the house that represented their entire life's work, was physically painful. I felt a wave of nausea. I felt responsible. I asked her how much they needed. She did not hesitate. She did not say she needed to check the bills. She did not say she needed to calculate the interest. She named a number fast, like she had rehearsed it in the mirror 100 times before dialing my number. She said just $2,500 a month. She said it quickly, as if saying it fast made the amount smaller. She said it would just be at first, just until they caught up, just until Dad was back on his feet, just until the insurance company fixed the error. $2,500. At 25 years old, that was a massive percentage of my income. That was my own rent, plus my student loan payment, plus groceries. That was the difference between me saving for a future and me living paycheck to paycheck again. I hesitated. I did the math in my head. I looked at the stove where my dinner was burning and I felt a flash of resentment, followed immediately by a crushing wave of guilt. How could I think about my savings when my father might be dying? How could I think about my comfort when my mother was weeping into the phone? Then she dropped the rule that trapped me, the condition that sealed the deal. She lowered her voice to a whisper, as if she was afraid he was in the next room. She told me I could not tell my father. She said he would be ashamed. She said it would kill him to know his little girl was bailing him out. She said his pride was the only thing he had left, and if I told him, it would break his heart. She said we had to protect him. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. She played on my love for my father, my fear of his mortality, and my desire to be the savior. She made us partners in a secret conspiracy of care. By asking me to hide it, she ensured I would never ask him for verification. She ensured I would never see the bills. She ensured that the only version of the truth I received was the one she fed me. I agreed. Of course I agreed. I was conditioned to be the responsible one. Since I was a child, I was the one who mediated arguments, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who cleaned up messes I did not make. Saying no did not feel like a boundary. It felt like letting everyone drown while I sat in a lifeboat. I told her yes. I told her I would handle it. I hung up the phone and I did not eat dinner. I sat on my couch in the dark and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account. The number that had made me feel so proud an hour ago now looked insufficient. I set up the transfer. I typed in the routing number she gave me. I typed in the account number. I typed in the amount, $2,500. I set the frequency to monthly. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was just for 3 months, maybe 4. I told myself that this was what success meant. It meant being able to catch your family when they fell. I pressed confirm. I watched the money leave my account. I felt a strange mixture of nausea and pride. I was a good daughter. That was what my mother had said right before she hung up. Her voice had shifted from panic to a soothing, authoritative calm, like a judge delivering a sentence. She said this is what good daughters do. She said she knew she could count on me because I was the strong one. I wore that label like a badge of honor. The strong one, the provider. For 3 days, I carried that secret like a holy relic. I went to work, I smiled at my boss, I ate cheap lunches, and I told myself that my sacrifice was noble. I imagined my parents sleeping soundly because of me. I imagined my father getting his medication without worry. Then came the crack in the facade. It was Friday, 3 days after the frantic, sobbing phone call about foreclosure and bankruptcy. I was scrolling through social media on my lunch break, eating a sandwich I had brought from home because I was now on a strict budget. I saw a notification. My sister, Talia, had posted a new album. Talia was 22 at the time. She was the free spirit, the creative one, the one who could never quite hold down a job because the vibes were off or the manager was too demanding. While I was the designated adult, she was the eternal child. I clicked on the notification. The photos were high definition, bright, and saturated with luxury. She was not at home helping my parents pack boxes. She was not comforting my sick father. She was at a boutique wellness retreat in Sedona. There was a photo of her in a plush white robe, holding a glass of green juice against a backdrop of red rocks. There was a photo of a massage table with hot stones. There was a video of her spinning around in a luxury suite that I knew cost at least $600 a night. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to put yourself first. Self-care weekend. Healing my soul." I stared at the phone. My sandwich turned to ash in my mouth. I did the math again. $2,500. I had sent that money to save their house. I had sent that money because they were drowning. And 3 days later, my sister was on a vacation that I could not afford to take myself. I felt a hot spike of anger in my chest. I almost called my mother right then. I almost demanded to know how Talia could afford a spa weekend if the bank was threatening to take the keys. But then the conditioning kicked in. The voice in the back of my head, the voice my mother had planted there over 25 years, started to make excuses. I told myself maybe it was a gift. Maybe a friend took her. Maybe she had saved up for months and this was non-refundable. Maybe it was none of my business. I told myself that Talia's life was separate from my parents' finances, even though she lived with them, even though she paid no rent, even though my mother bought her clothes. I swallowed the doubt. I forced it down deep where I kept all my other resentments. I told myself that love means not asking questions. I told myself that if I asked, I would look petty, I would look jealous, I would look like a bad sister. So I did nothing. I liked the photo. I commented, "Hope you are having fun." And the next month, when the calendar turned to the 1st, the automatic transfer triggered again. Another $2,500 flew out of my account and into theirs. I did not know it then, but I had just signed the first contract of my own exploitation. I had taught them that my money was accessible, that my guilt was harvestable, and that I would believe any story they told me as long as it ended with me being the hero. I thought I was saving them. But looking back at that 25-year-old girl sitting in her dark apartment, staring at a photo of her sister in a bathrobe, I realized the truth. I was not saving them. I was simply funding the lifestyle that they felt they deserved, and I was paying for the privilege of being lied to. That was the beginning. But as the years went on, the lie did not get smaller. It got hungrier. The number did not go down. It went up. And the stories became more elaborate, more desperate, and harder to escape. The creep of financial abuse is not a tsunami, it is a rising tide. You do not notice that the water is at your ankles until it is suddenly at your neck, and by then, you are too exhausted from treading water to swim for shore. If the initial request for $2,500 was the hook, the next 8 years were the slow reeling in of the line. For the first 6 months, the amount stayed steady. I adjusted my budget. I stopped buying coffee in the mornings. I canceled my gym membership and started running in the park, telling myself I preferred the fresh air anyway. I made it work. I felt a grim sense of accomplishment every time I hit the transfer button, a validation that I was the rock of the family. But crisis is a funny thing in a dysfunctionally enmeshed family. It is never solved. It just shapeshifts. 7 months in, my mother called me. The panic in her voice was different this time. It was not the weeping despair of the foreclosure scare. It was the frantic, high-pitched stress of immediate disaster. She told me the transmission on my father's truck had blown. She said he could not get to his appointments without it. She said the mechanic quoted them $1,100 more than they had. I sent the extra money. 2 months later. It was the central air conditioning unit. It was July in the Midwest, sweltering and humid, and she told me my father's heart condition made the heat dangerous. That was a permanent increase. The transfer jumped from $2,500 to $3,600 a month. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the spreadsheet where I tracked my expenses, I deleted the row for emergency savings. I deleted the row for travel fund. I typed in family support and watched it eat up nearly 40% of my take-home pay. Then came the final tier, the jump to $4,800. This one was not about a broken machine. It was about lifestyle maintenance, my mother explained, with a logic that sounded perfectly reasonable to her, that the cost of living had gone up. Their insurance premiums had skyrocketed, and they were drowning in credit card debt they had used to buy groceries. She made me feel like their hunger was my fault. She made me feel that my salary, which I worked 60 hours a week to earn, was actually a family resource that I was selfishly hoarding. So, $4,800 became the new rent, but the money was only half the poison. The other half was Talia. If I was the wallet. My sister Talia was the dream. During these years, Talia became my mother's pride project, while I was grinding out reports, managing client expectations, and working late nights to afford the money I was sending home. Talia was finding herself. Every time I drove home to visit, the dynamic was identical. I would walk through the door, exhausted, dark circles under my eyes, perhaps hoping for a warm meal or a question about my life. Instead, the kitchen table would be covered in Talia's latest venture. One year, it was handmade organic soaps. My mother looked at me, her eyes shining, and said, "Talia is an entrepreneur. She just needs support to get the inventory going." The next year, it was life coaching. Talia, who had never paid a bill in her life, was going to charge people to tell them how to organize theirs. My mother called her a creative visionary. The year after that, it was influencing. I remember one specific Sunday dinner. I had just been promoted to director of strategy at my firm. It was a massive achievement. I had beaten out 3 other candidates. I had a team of 12 people reporting to me. I sat down at the table, waiting for a pause in the conversation so I could share my news. I said, "I have some good news. I got the promotion." My father looked up from his plate and nodded. He said, "That is good. Savannah, good for you." My mother did not even look up. She was scrolling through her phone, showing Talia a listing for a high-end camera lens. She said, "That is nice, honey, but listen, Talia needs this lens for her portfolio. If she is going to be a real photographer, she cannot use amateur equipment. It is an investment in her future." I sat there, the words dying in my throat. My promotion was background noise. It was boring. It was expected. My success was only relevant insofar as it could fund Talia's potential. I was the reliable old sedan that got you from point A to point B. Talia was the shiny sports car that sat in the garage, collecting dust and costing a fortune. But everyone admired its lines. I started to shrink. I cut my spending down to the bone. I stopped getting my hair highlighted because $200 felt like theft from my parents. I declined invitations to bachelorette parties because I could not afford the flights. I took on extra freelance copywriting work under a pseudonym, working until 2 a.m, just to rebuild my own safety net. I told myself it was only for a season. I told myself that once Talia took off, or once my dad's health stabilized, I could stop. But seasons do not last 8 years. Climates do. My husband, Noah, saw the climate changing before I did. We had met 3 years into this arrangement. He was kind, observant, and incredibly patient. For a long time, he did not say anything about the money. He knew it was a sensitive topic. He respected that it was my family business. But he started noticing the pattern. He noticed that around the 28th of every month, my mood would shift. I would become irritable. I would check my bank account 5 times a day. I would get migraines. He called it transfer day syndrome. He noticed that when my mother called, I would physically hunch over, making myself smaller. He noticed that after a phone call with her, I would be depressed for 2 days. The breaking point for him came during a Thanksgiving visit. We had driven 5 hours to be there. I had brought the wine, the dessert, and a customized gift basket for my parents. I spent the first 4 hours of the visit in the kitchen, helping my mother cook, while Talia sat in the living room showing my father funny videos on TikTok. When we finally sat down to eat, My mother raised a glass. I thought, for a fleeting second, she might thank me for the help. She toasted to Talia. She said she was so proud of Talia for keeping her spirit bright during hard times. She said Talia brought light into the house. She did not mention the food. She did not mention the money that bought the food. She did not mention me. On the drive home, the car was quiet. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the highway and the rhythmic swish of the wipers. Noah turned down the radio. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands light on the wheel. He asked me a question that was so quiet I almost missed it. He asked if I had realized that in the 6 hours we were there. My mother never once asked how I was doing. I felt a defensive reflex kick in instantly. It was a physical reaction, a tightening in my chest. I wanted to protect them. I wanted to explain that they were stressed, that they were elderly, that they had a lot on their minds. I told him he was exaggerating. I told him Mom was just busy with the turkey. I told him they assume I am fine because I am always fine. Noah did not argue. He just let the silence stretch out. And in that silence, my defense crumbled. I replayed the day in my head. He was right. My mother had talked about her arthritis. She had talked about the neighbors. She had talked about Talia's new boyfriend. She had talked about the weather. She had not asked me a single question about my job, my life, or my happiness. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I hated myself for how easy it was to defend them. I hated that I was a 30-year-old woman making excuses for people who treated me like a utility. A few weeks later, as the first of the month approached, the anxiety returned. We were sitting at the dinner table. I was pushing food around my plate, doing the mental math of how much I would have left after the transfer. Noah put his fork down. He looked at me with an intensity that made me stop chewing. He suggested, very gently, that maybe we should set a boundary. He suggested that maybe $4,800 was too much. He suggested that maybe, just maybe, I should skip a month. Panic, cold and irrational, flooded my system. The thought of not sending the money made my heart race. I told him I could not do that. I told him if I stopped, they would be angry. I told him they would say I abandoned them. I whispered the truth that drove me. I said if I stop, they will hate me. Noah reached across the table and took my hand. His thumb rubbed the back of my knuckles, soothing the tension. He looked me dead in the eyes, and he delivered the truth that I had been running from for 8 years. He said that if the only reason they love me is because I pay their bills, then that is not love, that is a transaction. He said if I stop paying, and they hate me for it, then I will finally know what I mean to them. He said I was paying $4,800 a month to buy a version of parents that did not exist. I pulled my hand away. I was angry at him. I was angry because he was cruel. I was angry because he did not understand family loyalty. But mostly, I was angry because I knew, deep down in the darkest part of my heart, that he was absolutely right. I was not ready to stop the payments then. I was too afraid of the answer to his question. I preferred the comfortable lie to the painful truth. I preferred to believe that I was a beloved daughter helping her struggling parents, rather than a mark being fleeced by 2 people who preferred my money to my presence. So I kept paying. I kept working. I kept shrinking. But the seed was planted. Noah had cracked the window, and for the first time, I was starting to see the smog I had been breathing. And then, the universe decided to raise the stakes. I looked down at a plastic stick in a bathroom 2 months later, and 2 pink lines stared back at me. I was pregnant, and suddenly, the money was not just numbers on a screen anymore. It was diapers. It was a college fund. It was safety. It was a future that I was currently handing over to a sister who was finding herself at a spa, and parents who could not be bothered to ask how I was. The clock had started ticking. The 2 pink lines on the plastic stick did not just tell me I was pregnant. They told me I was currently defenseless, for 8 years. I had treated my finances like an infinite resource that I could simply work harder to replenish. If I sent my parents money, I would just pick up another contract. If I drained my savings, I would just skip a vacation. I was young, I was healthy, and I was capable. but looking at that positive pregnancy test. The equation changed violently. I was no longer just Savannah the provider. I was Savannah the protector. Suddenly, money was not abstract. It was not just numbers on a banking app that I moved around to keep the peace. Money was a crib. Money was a college fund. Money was the ability to take unpaid maternity leave if I needed to. Money was the wall between my child and the chaos of the world. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, the test trembling in my hand, and for the first time, I allowed myself to do the math I had been avoiding for nearly a decade. I pulled out my phone and opened the calculator. My hands were cold. $4,800 a month, 12 months a year, 8 years. I typed the numbers in. 4,800 multiplied by 12 is $57,600 a year. Multiplied by 8. The number that stared back at me made the air leave my lungs. $460,800. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Almost $500,000. That was a house. That was a fully funded retirement account. That was the freedom to quit the job that stressed me out. That was an entire life that I had siphoned off, drop by drop, month by month, and poured into a black hole 20 minutes away. I felt sick, not morning sickness, but a deep, spiritual nausea. I had not just been generous, I had been robbed. And I had handed the robber the combination to the safe, but I still had hope. I was naive enough to believe that a baby changes everything. I thought that surely, the arrival of a new life, the first grandchild, would reset the priorities. I thought my mother would understand that things had to change. I called her an hour later. I wanted to share the joy before I shared the boundary. I told her the news. I said, "Mom, I am pregnant." There was a pause. I waited for the squeal of delight. I waited for her to ask how I was feeling. Instead, she let out a long sigh, the kind of sound you make when a waiter finally brings a drink you ordered 20 minutes ago. She said, "Finally." She said she was wondering if I would ever give her a grandbaby. The phrasing stung. Give her, as if my child was a gift I had been withholding from her, as if my body was a factory and I had been on a strike. She did not congratulate me. She did not ask about the due date. She immediately launched into how exciting this would be for her, how she could buy cute outfits, how she could show off to her friends at the bridge club who all had grandchildren already. I swallowed the hurt. I told myself she was just excited in her own way. Then, I pivoted to the hard part. I kept my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I said, "Mom, since the baby is coming, Noah and I have been looking at our budget. We need to start saving for the nursery and medical bills. I am going to have to scale back the monthly transfer." I did not say I was stopping it. I was too afraid to say that. I said scale back. I was negotiating for permission to use my own money. The temperature on the other end of the line dropped instantly. The happy grandmother vanished, replaced by the debt collector. She asked what I meant by scale back. I said I could send $2,000 next month instead of $4,800. She went cold. Then she went furious. Then, with the practiced skill of a veteran actress, she went wounded. She asked if I was punishing them. She asked if I wanted them to starve. She said, "After everything we have sacrificed for you, you only think about yourself." I was stunned. Everything they sacrificed? I had bought their cars. I had paid their mortgage. I had funded their lifestyle for the entirety of my 20s. I heard a noise in the background. It was my father. His voice sounded faint, muffled, like he was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. I heard him say, "Well, Linda, maybe we should—" He did not get to finish the sentence. My mother snapped at him. She did not yell, but her tone was like a whip crack. She told him to be quiet. She told him he did not understand the finances. She told him to go back to the living room. Then she came back to me, her voice trembling with manufactured tears. She told me that my father's medication costs had gone up again. She said the roof was leaking. She said they were barely holding on as it was, and if I cut them off now, the stress would kill my father, and it would be on my conscience. She weaponized my unborn child against me. She said, "Do you want your baby to grow up knowing you let his grandparents lose their home?" I caved. I hated myself for it. But I caved. I told her we would talk about it later. I told her I would send the full amount for now. She hung up without saying I love you. She just said, I knew you would do the right thing. That night, sleep was impossible. Noah was asleep beside me, his breathing steady and calm, but I was wide awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in the dark. The number, 460,800, kept flashing in my mind like a neon sign. I picked up my phone. I needed to see something real. I needed to understand where the money was going. I went to my mother's social media page. She had posted 3 hours ago. The caption read, "Living it up with my favorite people. Despite the hard times, we find reasons to smile." The photo was not of a woman barely holding on. It was not of a couple struggling to buy medication. It was a photo of my parents and my sister Talia at a charity gala at the country club. The tickets for that gala were $300 a plate. I knew this because my boss had bought a table for our firm. My mother was wearing a new dress. I zoomed in. It was a designer brand. My sister was wearing jewelry I had never seen before. They were holding glasses of champagne. I looked at the timestamp. She had posted this photo 2 hours after telling me they were drowning. She had posted this while I was crying to Noah about how I felt guilty for wanting to buy a high-safety car seat. I felt a crack in my chest. It was the sound of my denial finally breaking under the weight of the evidence. I shook Noah awake. He woke up groggy, confused. But when he saw my face, he sat up immediately. He turned on the bedside lamp. I showed him the photo. I told him what she had said on the phone. Noah did not say I told you so. He did not get angry. He simply got out of bed, walked to his desk, and opened his laptop. He said, "Come here." "Savannah." I walked over. He opened a spreadsheet he had been keeping. He had never shown it to me because he knew I was not ready to see it. But he knew I was ready now. He had mapped it out. On the left column were the dates I sent money. On the middle column were the crises my mother had claimed. On the right column were Talia's social media posts. The pattern was undeniable. It was not random. It was a system. May 2021. Crisis. Dad needs emergency dental work. $5,000. Social media. 3 days later, Talia posts a photo from a VIP music festival. Cost of ticket and travel, roughly $4,000. November 2022. Crisis. The furnace blew up. Need $4,000 for a new unit. Social media. 1 week later, Talia launches her jewelry business with a stocked inventory of gold-plated chains and a professional photo shoot. February 2024. Crisis. Insurance lapse. Need back pay, or they lose coverage. Social media. My parents and Talia check into a resort in Florida for a mental health break. It went on and on. Row after row. Years of lies. Every time I sent money for a disaster, my sister got an upgrade. Every time I paid for survival, they bought luxury. I looked at Noah. My hands were not shaking anymore. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. It was the anger of a fool who finally realizes she has been the mark. I realized then that my parents were not poor. They were not bad with money. They were simply funding a 3-person life on a 4-person income. And I was the 4th person who was not invited to the party. I closed the laptop. I looked at Noah. I told him to send me the file. Then I started my own collection. I did not scream. I did not call them to confront them. That would have given them a chance to spin a new lie. That would have given them a chance to cry and guilt-trip me back into submission. I knew now that words were useless against people who used language as a weapon. I needed ammunition. I spent the next 4 months quietly building a case file. I downloaded 8 years of bank statements. I highlighted every single transfer. I printed out the text messages where my mother claimed poverty. I screenshot every single social media post that contradicted her claims. I matched the dates. I organized the evidence. I tracked the loans I had given Talia that were never repaid. I tracked the times they forgot my birthday, but bought themselves new electronics the same week. I became a forensic accountant of my own trauma. As my belly grew, so did the folder. Every kick from my baby was a reminder of who I was fighting for. I was not just fighting for my money back, I was fighting to ensure that my child would never, ever be treated as a resource to be harvested. The clock was ticking toward my due date, and it was also ticking toward the end of their free ride. I continued to send the transfers during those last few months. I did it because I did not want to tip them off. I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to believe that the ATM was still broken and dispensing cash on command. I wanted them to be comfortable, because I wanted the shock to be absolute. I was preparing for the birth of my son, but I was also preparing for a funeral. I was preparing to bury the relationship I thought I had with my parents. And then came the rain. Then came the drive home. Then came the headlights in the intersection. And when I woke up in that hospital bed, alone, with my parents refusing to come because they had plans, I knew that the investigation was over. The jury had returned, the verdict was guilty, and it was time for sentencing. It was a Thursday. It was the kind of Thursday that feels entirely forgettable right up until the moment it becomes the only day you will ever remember. I was 34 weeks pregnant. The baby was heavy, pressing against my ribs. A constant, comforting reminder of the life Noah and I were about to start. I had left the office a little late, around 6:30 in the evening. The sun had already set, and the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with rain clouds that had been threatening to burst all afternoon. By the time I turned onto the main road leading to our subdivision, the rain had started. It was not a storm, just a steady, rhythmic drumming on the windshield. The wipers swished back and forth, a hypnotic metronome. Swish, 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 swish. I was thinking about the nursery. I was thinking about the shade of sage green we had picked for the walls. I was thinking about Noah, who was 3,000 miles away in Seattle at a tech conference. We had texted 20 minutes ago. He sent me a picture of his hotel view, rainy and gray, just like home, and promised to call me before bed. I stopped at the red light at the intersection of Maple and 4th. The light turned green. I pressed the gas pedal gently. I remember seeing the headlights in my peripheral vision. They were moving too fast. That was the first thought. Detached and clinical. That car is moving too fast for the weather. There was no screech of brakes. The other driver did not see the red light. Or perhaps they did not care. The impact was not a sound. It was a physical force that rearranged the world. The side of my SUV crumpled inwards. Glass shattered, sounding like 1,000 wind chimes falling at once. The airbag deployed with a punch that knocked the wind out of me, filling the cabin with a dusty chemical smell. The car spun, once, twice, skidding across the wet asphalt until it slammed into the guardrail. Then, silence. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then the pain arrived. It started in my shoulder, radiated down my arm, and then settled, terrifying and sharp, in my abdomen. My hand flew to my stomach. "Please," I whispered. "Please, please, please." I tasted copper, blood. Then the world exploded into noise, sirens wailing in the distance, getting louder every second. Someone was banging on my window, a face pressed against the shattered glass, mouthing words I could not hear. Voices, clipped, urgent, shouting codes. I was being pulled out. I was on a stretcher. The rain was cold on my face. Mixing with the hot tears, I did not realize I was crying. A paramedic leaned over me. "Ma'am, can you hear me? We're taking you to Memorial. You've been in an accident." "My baby," I gasped. "Is my baby okay?" He didn't answer directly. He shouted to his partner. "Get the OB team ready. Fetal heart rate is dropping. We need to move. Now." The ambulance ride was a blur of lights and bumpy roads. They cut my clothes off. They inserted IVs. The monitors beeped frantically. A chaotic soundtrack to my own terror. When we burst through the double doors of the emergency room, the energy shifted from chaotic to surgical. Doctors swarmed. Questions were fired at me faster than I could answer. 34 weeks, I managed to say. "Noah, my husband. Call Noah." Then the darkness started to creep in at the edges of my vision. I felt cold. So incredibly cold. The lead doctor, a woman with a face of steel. looked at the monitor, then at me. "Savannah, we need to get the baby out now. You have placental abruption. You're losing blood." "Save him," I whispered. "Don't worry about me. Save him." The anesthesia mask descended over my face. The last thing I heard was the doctor saying, "Let's move, people. We have 2 patients in critical," while I was under the bright lights of the operating room, fighting to stay tethered to the earth. Noah was living his own version of hell 3,000 miles away. He told me later that he was at a mixer for the conference when his phone rang. It was not me. It was a number he did not recognize with a local area code. He answered, expecting a spam call. "Mr. Phillips? This is Dr. Evans from Memorial Hospital." Noah said his knees actually gave out. He had to grab the edge of a high-top table to keep from falling. The doctor explained the situation. Accident, emergency C-section, both mother and child critical but stable for the moment. Noah ran. He did not say goodbye to his colleagues. He left his jacket on the chair. He ran out of the hotel and into a cab, shouting at the driver to get him to the airport. He checked the flights on his phone. The earliest flight out was in 40 minutes, but it had a layover. He wouldn't be back for at least 6 hours. 6 hours. He felt like he was suffocating. His wife was being cut open. His son was being born into trauma, and he was stuck in traffic in Seattle. He needed someone there. He needed eyes on us. He needed to know that someone was holding my hand, or at least standing outside the door waiting for news. He needed family. He scrolled through his contacts. His own parents were in Florida, too far away to help, but my parents were 20 minutes away. My parents, who I had supported for 8 years. My parents, whose house I had saved. My parents, who claimed to love me. Noah dialed my mother's number. It rang 4 times. Finally, she picked up. The background noise was loud. Music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. "Hello?" Her voice was bright, airy. "Linda," Noah said, his voice shaking. "It's Noah. You need to get to the hospital. Now." The line went quiet for a second. The music in the background seemed to swell. "Noah? Why? What's going on? You sound frantic." "Savannah was in a car accident," Noah said, the words tearing out of his throat. "It's bad. Linda, they took her into emergency surgery. They're delivering the baby now. I'm in Seattle. I can't get there for 6 hours. You need to go. You need to be there for them." Noah expected a gasp. He expected the sound of a chair scraping back, keys jingling, the panic of a mother hearing her child is hurt. Instead, there was a hesitation. It was a pause that lasted maybe 3 seconds. But Noah said it felt like a lifetime. "Oh my God," my mother said. But the tone was not horror. It was annoyance. It was the tone of someone who has just been told their dry cleaning won't be ready until Tuesday. Is she okay?" "I don't know," Noah snapped. "That's why I need you there. I need you to go to the NICU. The baby is going to be premature. Savannah is under anesthesia. They're alone. Linda, please." Another pause, longer this time. Noah could hear her muffling the phone against her shoulder. He heard her whisper something to someone else. He heard my sister's laugh in the background. Then my mother came back on the line. "Noah, honey," she started, her voice taking on that sickeningly sweet, condescending tone she used when she was about to deny a request. "We can't do this tonight." Noah stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the airport terminal, people rushing past him, feeling like the ground had opened up. "What?" he whispered. "We have plans," she said. "We're at the Glittering Charity Gala. Talia is being honored for her contribution to the Arts Committee. It's a special event. We have a table. People are watching." Noah felt a rage so pure and hot it nearly blinded him. "Linda, did you hear me? Your daughter is in surgery. Your grandson is being born right now, probably fighting for his life." "You know how hospitals are," she said, dismissive. "They always make things sound dramatic to cover their liabilities. I'm sure she's fine. It's probably just a fender bender and they are being cautious." "She is having a C-section," Noah screamed into the phone. People in the terminal turned to look at him. They don't do emergency C-sections for fender benders. Lower your voice, my mother hissed. You're overreacting. Look, we can't leave right now. We haven't even had the main course yet, and Talia has to give a speech later. We can't just walk out. You can, Noah said. You absolutely can. It is your daughter. The baby will be fine there, she said, repeating the phrase that would haunt me later. The nurses are professionals. What are we going to do? Just sit in a waiting room? That helps no one. Noah took a deep breath. He needed to be sure. He needed to be absolutely certain that he was hearing this correctly. He needed to know that there was no misunderstanding, no bad connection, no confusion. Linda, he said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. I am going to ask you one question, and I want you to think very carefully about the answer. Are you seriously refusing to go meet your newborn grandbaby? Are you refusing to go to the hospital while your daughter is unconscious? The silence on the other end was heavy. Noah could hear the smile in her voice when she answered. The smile of a woman who believes she is the main character of the universe and everyone else is just an extra. Not tonight, she said flatly. We will swing by tomorrow if we have time. Tell Savannah to rest. And she hung up. Noah stood there, staring at his phone. The screen went black. He stood in the middle of the busy terminal, surrounded by strangers, and realized that my family was dead. They were not physically dead, but the people we thought they were, the people we had paid for, the people we had sacrificed for, had never existed. He dialed his next call. He did not call his friends. He did not call his boss. He called the one person he knew would actually show up. He called my grandfather. Back in the operating room, I was floating in a gray void. I could not feel my legs. I could not feel the pain anymore. Then, I heard it. It was faint at first, then louder. A cry. A thin, reedy, beautiful wail. It's a boy, a voice said. He's small, but he's breathing. I tried to open my eyes, but the lids were too heavy. Let her see him, someone said. Just for a second, I felt something warm brush against my cheek. It was soft. It smelled like iron and vernix and life. Hi, I mouthed. No sound came out. We have to take him to the NICU, the doctor said. He needs oxygen. Who is the contact? A nurse asked. Is the father here? Father is in transit, another voice answered. Grandparents listed as local contacts. Did they come? No one is in the waiting room. Okay, he goes alone. Let's move. The warmth left my cheek. My son was wheeled away, alone in a plastic box, down a long, sterile hallway. I drifted back into the darkness. I did not know then that my mother was eating a $300 steak while my son was being hooked up to monitors. I did not know that my sister was posting selfies with a caption about abundance while I was being stitched back together. I only knew that when I woke up. The world would be different. The rain had washed away the road I was on, and when the fog cleared, I would see clearly for the first time in my life. Noah boarded his plane. He sat in the window seat, staring out at the rain-streaked wing. He did not sleep. He opened his laptop. He opened the spreadsheet, and he began to type a new tab. He titled it, The End. Because while my mother thought she had just declined an inconvenient invitation, she had actually just signed the death warrant for her own future. She thought she was staying for dinner. She didn't realize she was eating her last meal at our table. The plane took off, banking hard into the dark clouds, and back on the ground, in the quiet hum of the NICU. My grandfather was parking his truck. He walked with a cane, but he moved fast. He had a folder on the passenger seat, but he left it there for now. Tonight was for holding my hand. Tomorrow was for holding them accountable. The storm outside was raging, but the real storm was just getting started, and this one had a name. It was called consequences. Waking up from emergency surgery is not like waking up from a nap. It is like being pulled backward through a dark, viscous tunnel. My brain registered the light before my eyes could focus on it. It was harsh, white, and unrelenting. My first sensation was thirst. My throat felt like it had been scrubbed with sandpaper. My second sensation was pain, a searing hot line of fire across my lower abdomen that pulsed with every beat of my heart. But my third sensation was terror. It hit me before I even knew where I was. The memory of the headlights, the spin, the silence. "My baby," I croaked. The sound was barely a whisper, a broken noise that scraped against the silence of the room. I tried to sit up, but my body refused. It felt like I was pinned to the mattress by invisible weights. A face appeared above me. It was not the doctor from before. It was a nurse, older, with kind eyes and a stethoscope around her neck. She placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm. "Easy, honey," she said. Her voice was soft, practiced. "You are in recovery. You are safe." "My baby," I said again, forcing the words past my dry tongue. "Where is he?" "He is in the NICU," she said. She did not hesitate, which was the first mercy I had received that night. "He is stable. He is small, Savannah, and he is working hard to breathe, but he is stable. The doctors are with him right now." Stable. The word hung in the air. It was not fine. It was not perfect. It was stable. It meant he was holding on, but only just. I closed my eyes, letting the tears leak out of the corners. I was alive. He was alive. Then the reality of the room settled in. I looked around. There was a chair in the corner. It was empty. There was a small sofa near the window. It was empty. The door was closed. The nurse was checking my vitals, adjusting the drip on my IV. She was moving with a professional efficiency. But I noticed something else. She was avoiding my eyes. "My husband," I said. "Noah? Is he here?" "He called," she said, checking the monitor. "He is on a plane. He said he lands in about 4 hours. He is checking in constantly." 4 hours. I was alone. I swallowed hard. "My parents," I said. "Did they come back?" I assumed they had been there while I was in surgery. I assumed they had stepped out to get coffee, or to go to the bathroom. I assumed that even if they had plans, the reality of their daughter being cut open would have dragged them to the hospital. The nurse stopped adjusting the IV. She froze for a fraction of a second. It was a microscopic pause, but in the high-stakes language of a hospital room, it was a scream. She turned to look at me, and her expression was one of pained politeness. "We do not have anyone signed in for you, sweetheart," she said. I stared at her. "Did anyone call? Besides Noah?" "Just your husband," she said. "He gave us the contact info for your parents. We tried them when you were in intake. There has been no one else." The silence that followed was heavier than the lead apron they use for x-rays. Nobody came. Nobody signed in. Nobody checked. I lay there, feeling the stitches pull at my skin, and felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I had spent 8 years ensuring their comfort. I had spent nearly $500,000 buying their security, and when I was bleeding on an operating table, they could not be bothered to drive 20 minutes to see if I survived. "Can you hand me my phone?" I asked. The nurse hesitated, probably wondering if I was strong enough to handle whatever was on that screen. But she nodded. She reached into a clear plastic bag with my personal effects. My bloodied clothes were gone, replaced by this bag, and handed me my cracked phone. I unlocked it. The bright light stung my eyes. I went to my text messages. There was a thread with my mother. I had texted her yesterday about a sale on crib sheets. The last message in the thread was not from me. It was not from her. It was a timestamp. Read yesterday at 8:45 p.m. That was 3 hours ago. That was after Noah had called them. That was while I was in surgery. She had looked at the chat. She had seen the history of our conversation, and she had typed nothing. No, "Are you okay?" No, "We are on our way." No, "I love you." Just, "Seen." She had checked her phone, likely between courses at her gala, saw nothing that required her immediate financial attention, and put the phone back in her clutch. I felt a sob rise in my throat. but I swallowed it down. I did not have the luxury of breaking down yet. I was alone. And when you are alone, you do not get to be a victim. You have to be a manager. A knock on the door interrupted the silence. A woman in a blazer walked in. She introduced herself as the hospital social worker. She was kind, professional, and terrifying. She was here because the chart said, Mother critical, infant in NICU, father in transit. She was here to assess the support system. She asked me questions that felt like autopsies of my life. Do you have family in the area who can assist with decision-making until your husband arrives? She asked. I looked at the empty chair. No, I said. The word tasted like ash. No, I do not. Okay, she said, making a note. We need to talk about discharge planning. Eventually, and we need to talk about visitation for the NICU. Usually, we allow grandparents to visit if the parents are incapacitated. No, I said again. This time, the word was stronger. No one visits him but me and Noah. No one. She looked up, surprised by the steel in my voice. Okay, we can put that in the file. Restricted access. Restricted, I repeated. Strictly, we talked for 10 minutes. She explained that since I was recovering from major surgery and my husband was hours away, I needed help. I needed someone to sit with the baby when I couldn't. I needed someone to make sure I didn't fall trying to go to the bathroom. I realized then that I had to plan my life as if my parents did not exist. I had to plan as if I were an orphan, because effectively, I was... Can I hire someone? I asked. A sitter? Someone vetted by the hospital? The social worker nodded. We have a list of doulas and night nurses who are credentialed for NICU support. It is an out-of-pocket expense, though I don't care, I said. Get me the best one you have. I want someone sitting by his incubator until his father gets here. I don't want him to be alone for a single second. She nodded and left to make the calls. I lay back against the pillows. Love, I realized, sometimes looks like logistics. Love looks like hiring a stranger to hold your baby's hand because the people who share your DNA are too busy eating shrimp cocktails. I was alone again. The pain meds were making the edges of the room fuzzy, but my mind was sharpening into a diamond-hard point. I picked up my phone again. I did not go to social media. I did not go to my texts. I opened my banking app. Face ID, let me in. The numbers popped up on the screen. My checking account, my savings account, and there, right at the top, was the scheduled transfer. Pending, $4,800, scheduled for tomorrow. The first of the month. I stared at it. For 8 years. That transfer had been the rhythm of my life. It was the heartbeat of my relationship with my parents. I worked, I bled, I stressed, and on the first of the month, the money moved. It was the price of admission to their love. I thought about the nurse saying, nobody signed in. I thought about my mother saying, we have plans. I thought about my son, tiny and fighting for air in a plastic box down the hall, while my mother drank champagne paid for by the money I sent her last month. My thumb hovered over the transfer. I clicked on it. A menu popped up. Edit, skip, cancel. I pressed cancel. A warning box appeared. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer to mom and dad joint? I looked at the yes button. I thought I would feel guilty. I thought I would feel terror. I had spent my entire adult life terrified of this moment, terrified of letting them down, terrified of them hating me. But as I looked at that button, I didn't feel fear. I felt grief, deep, hollow grief for the little girl inside me who had tried so hard to be good. I grieved for the 25-year-old who ate ramen so her parents could keep their house. I grieved for the daughter who just wanted to be asked how she was doing. But right next to the grief, rising up like a sunrise, was relief. I pressed yes. The screen refreshed. Transfer canceled. I wasn't done. I went to the payee list. I found Mom and Dad Joint. I found Talia Venmo. I found the bill pay I had set up for their car insurance. I deleted them, one by one. Delete payee. Confirm. Delete payee. Confirm. Delete payee. Confirm. With every tap of my finger, A chain fell off my wrists. I was cutting the line. I was burning the bridge, and I was doing it from a hospital bed, broken and stitched up, but more powerful than I had ever been in my life. I closed the banking app. It was done. The spigot was turned off. The ATM was out of order. I took a deep breath. The air rattling in my chest. I felt lighter. I felt terrifyingly free. Then, my thumb drifted to the Instagram app. I shouldn't have done it. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I needed to see it. I needed to see the trade. I needed to see what my parents had chosen over me. I opened the app. Talia's story was the first bubble at the top. I tapped it. The video filled the screen. It was loud. Music was pumping. Some generic upbeat house track. The camera panned around a ballroom bathed in purple light. There were centerpieces made of orchids. There were waiters with silver trays. And there they were. My mother was laughing, her head thrown back, a flute of champagne in her hand. My father was next to her, looking uncomfortable but compliant in a tuxedo I had paid for 3 years ago. And Talia was in the center of the frame, holding a small glass award. She was wearing a silver dress that looked like liquid mercury. She was beaming. The caption was overlaid in a stylized, cursive font. So honored to be recognized tonight, living my best life. Family is everything. I stared at the screen. Family is everything. She posted that while my son was hooked up to a ventilator. She posted that while I was lying in a recovery room, wondering if I would ever walk without pain again. In the background of the video, I could see my mother lean in and say something to Talia. They both laughed. It was a conspiratorial laugh, a laugh without a care in the world. They looked rich. They looked happy. They looked unburdened. And they were unburdened. Because I had been carrying their burdens for 8 years, I watched the video loop 3 times. Family is everything. I took a screenshot. I didn't do it to be petty. I did it for the file. I did it because one day, they were going to come back. One day, when the money didn't hit the account, when the credit cards were declined, when the reality set in, they were going to come crawling back with tears and stories about how worried they were. And I needed to remember this moment. I needed to remember the purple light. I needed to remember the orchids. I needed to remember the smile on my mother's face while her grandson was fighting for his life alone. I closed the phone and placed it face down on the bedside table. The room was dark. The only light came from the monitors and the faint glow of the hallway under the door. I was alone, but for the first time in 8 years, I wasn't being used. I closed my eyes and waited for the morning. I waited for Noah. And I waited for the inevitable collision that was coming when the sun rose and the bank opened. My parents had their plans. They had their gala. But I had made plans too, and mine were permanent. The hospital room at 4 a.m. is a unique kind of purgatory. The adrenaline of the trauma had faded, leaving behind a throbbing ache in my incision and a hollow, ringing silence in my ears. I was staring at the window, watching the rain streak against the glass, waiting for the sun to rise or for my husband to walk through the door. I did not expect the door to open before sunrise. I turned my head, expecting a nurse to check my vitals again. It was not a nurse. It was my grandfather, Walter. He is 80 years old, a man built from the kind of iron they do not manufacture anymore. He leaned heavily on his cane, his knuckles white against the wood, but his eyes were clear and sharp. He was wearing his Sunday coat, even though it was a rainy Friday morning, and he carried a thick, expandable leather folder under his arm like a weapon. He did not stop at the nurse's station to ask for permission. He did not hover in the doorway waiting to be invited in. He walked straight to the side of my bed, the rubber tip of his cane squeaking softly on the linoleum. He looked at the monitors. He looked at the IV drip. Then he looked at me. His face, usually stoic and reserved, crumpled for a fraction of a second. It was the first time I had ever seen him look afraid, but he composed himself instantly. He reached out and took my hand. His skin was papery and cool, but his grip was solid. "You are not alone anymore," he said. His voice was gravelly and low. It was not a question. It was a declaration. I felt a lump rise in my throat, hot and painful. After the silence of the night, after the seen message from my mother, after the realization that I was an orphan with living parents. Hearing those 5 words broke something open inside me. "They didn't come. Grandpa," I whispered. "I was in surgery, and they didn't come." "I know," he said. He pulled the chair, the empty chair, closer to the bed and sat down with a heavy sigh. "I know they didn't come, and I know why." He placed the leather folder on the tray table. It landed with a heavy, dull thud. He unzipped it. I expected to see legal papers. I expected to see a will. What I saw made my breath hitch. It was a spreadsheet, but it was not the one Noah had made. It was older. It was printed on grid paper, the handwriting precise and angular. "I have been watching them," Grandpa said quietly, "for 6 years." He flipped a page. There were photocopies of bank transfers, not my bank transfers, theirs. He had access to their accounts because his name was still on the deed to their house, a holdover from when he helped them refinance 20 years ago. He had never removed himself from the paperwork, and they had been too lazy to ask him to. He pointed a finger at a column of numbers. "I saw the money coming in," he said. $4,800, every month, like clockwork. I knew Dean didn't make that kind of money. I knew Linda hasn't worked since '98. He looked at me, his eyes full of a profound sadness. "I suspected it was you, but I didn't know the extent of it until tonight when Noah called me." He flipped another page. "I watched the money come in," he continued, his voice hardening. "And I watched where it went. It didn't go to the mortgage. It didn't go to doctors." He pointed to a list of highlighted charges. Casino, luxury leasing, Nordstrom, Delta Airlines. He looked up at me. "They were bleeding you dry, Savannah. And they were partying with the blood." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I know. I finally figured it out. I canceled it. I canceled everything tonight." Grandpa nodded. "Good, but that is only half of it." He leaned in closer, his expression shifting from anger to disgust. "You think they just took your money," he said. "But it is worse than that. Linda didn't just steal from your wallet. She stole your reputation." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Grandpa took a deep breath. "For years, Linda has been telling the rest of the family, your Aunt Sarah, your cousins in Ohio, even me, that you were distant. She told us you were selfish." My jaw dropped. "Selfish? I paid for everything." "She told us that you refused to help," Grandpa said. "When your father had that dental surgery last year, she told Aunt Sarah that she had to beg you for a loan and you said no. She told the family that the reason they were struggling was because they had helped you out with some legal trouble years ago and you never paid them back." I felt the room spin. "Legal trouble? I have never even had a parking ticket." "I know," Grandpa said. "But that is the story she told. She painted you as the ungrateful, successful daughter who abandoned her struggling parents. She made herself the martyr. She got sympathy. She got casseroles delivered to the house. She got checks from your cousins." I felt sick, physically sick. I had been sending them nearly $5,000 a month, and they had been telling the world I was a monster. They took my money with one hand and stabbed me in the back with the other. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would she do that?" "Control," Grandpa said. "If the family thought you were selfish, no one would talk to you. No one would compare notes. She isolated you. She made sure that if you ever complained, no one would believe you." He paused, and I could tell there was one more thing, the hardest thing. "There is more," he said softly. He pulled a document from the back of the folder. It was a draft of a legal letter. "Last month," Grandpa said, "Linda came to my house. She brought Talia with her." He tapped the paper. "She asked me to change my will." I stared at him. "She told me that you had married well," Grandpa said. "She said Noah makes good money. She said you have a big house. She told me that you didn't need anything from me." He looked at me, his eyes burning. "She wanted me to rewrite the estate plan. She wanted everything: the house, the savings, the land, to go into a trust for Talia. She said Talia was fragile. She said Talia needed protection. I closed my eyes. It was the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't enough to drain my current income. She wanted to ensure that I received nothing from my inheritance. She wanted to strip mine my future to pave the road for her golden child. "What did you say?" I asked. "I told her I would think about it," Grandpa said, "because I wanted to see how far she would go. And now I know." Just then, the door to the room creaked open. I flinched. It was my father. He stood in the doorway, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and rain-soaked khakis. His eyes were red and rimmed with dark circles. He looked like a man who had been dragged out of bed by his conscience, or perhaps by fear. He didn't look at me. He looked at Grandpa. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't know you were here." "Come in." "Dean," Grandpa said. His voice was like a gavel striking a desk. My father shuffled into the room. He looked at the bed. He looked at the machines. "Savannah," he said, I'm so sorry. About the accident. Is the baby?" "He is alone," I said. My voice was ice cold. "He is alone in a box down the hall because his grandmother had a gala to attend." My father flinched as if I had slapped him. "I wanted to come," he stammered. "I told her we should come, but she said it would cause a scene." "You are a grown man, Dean," Grandpa cut in. "You have keys to a car. You could have driven yourself." My father looked down at his shoes. "She drives. You know I don't like driving at night, and she had the keys." It was such a pathetic excuse. It was the excuse of a hostage who has fallen in love with his captor. "I didn't know," my father whispered. "I didn't know she refused to come until we were in the car driving home. She told me Noah called and was being dramatic. I didn't know it was surgery." "Stop it," Grandpa said. "Just stop." He pointed at the folder on the table. "I have the records. Dean, I have the bank transfers. I know about the casino. I know about the lies about the medical bills." My father's face went gray. He looked at the folder, then at me. I knew some of it," he admitted. His voice was a whisper. "I knew you were helping us. I didn't know how much. Linda handled the bills. She told me you wanted to help. She said you insisted." "I insisted?" I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "She told me you were dying. Dad, she told me you would feel ashamed if I told you. I did it to save you." My father started to cry. It was a silent, weeping cry. "I was ashamed," he said. "I am ashamed. I let her handle it because I didn't want to know how bad it was. I just wanted the lights to stay on. I am so sorry. Savannah." He was crying, but I felt no pity. Pity is for victims. He was an accomplice. He had traded his dignity for comfort, and he had let his wife consume his daughter to pay for it. Grandpa watched him cry for a moment, his face impassive. Then he reached out and closed the folder. The sound of the leather slapping shut echoed in the room. "Tears don't pay back $500,000. Dean," Grandpa said. My father looked up, terrified. "$500,000? $460,000, Grandpa corrected. "And change." He stood up. He grabbed his cane. He looked 10 feet tall. "Linda is not here," Grandpa said. "I assume she is sleeping off the champagne." "She's at home," Dad whispered. "Good," Grandpa said. "You are going to go home, Dean, and you are going to tell her to wake up." He placed his hand on my shoulder one last time. "I have a lawyer meeting me here at 9 o'clock, Grandpa said. "We have a lot of paperwork to do. I am changing the trust. I am changing the medical proxy." He looked at my father. "And Dean?" My father looked up. "You tell Linda something for me," Grandpa said. "You tell her that the money is gone. The will is gone." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle in the room. "And tell her that Linda and Dean are not just losing access to my estate," he said. "They are about to lose the story they have been telling everyone." "What story?" my father asked. confused. "The story that you are the victims," Grandpa said. "The story that Savannah is cold. The story that you are good parents who just had some bad luck." Grandpa picked up the folder. "I kept the receipts," he said, "and I am about to show them to everyone. Aunt Sarah, the cousins, the church, everyone." He turned to me. "Rest. Savannah, Noah will be here soon. I will be outside the door. No one gets in without my permission." He walked out of the room, the cane tapping a steady rhythm. My father stood there for a moment, looking at me, looking for absolution. I turned my head to the window. "Go home, Dad," I said. "Go tell Mom the party is over." He left. The door clicked shut. I watched the first gray light of dawn creep over the horizon. I was in pain. I was exhausted. But for the first time in my life, the truth was out in the open. The folder was closed, but the war had just begun. It was almost noon when the door finally opened again. I had been awake for hours, drifting in and out of a restless, pain-medicated doze. Noah had arrived an hour earlier, exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed, smelling of airport coffee and stale anxiety. He was sitting by the window, holding my hand, his head resting on the mattress near my hip. Grandpa was sitting in the corner, a silent sentinel, his cane resting against his knee and the leather folder on his lap. We were a tableau of grief and exhaustion, and then my mother entered. She did not look like a woman who had been told her daughter was nearly killed. She did not look like a grandmother whose first grandchild was fighting for breath down the hall. She looked like she was arriving for a brunch reservation that she was slightly late for. She was wearing a beige trench coat, belted perfectly at the waist. Over a crisp white blouse, her hair was blow-dried to perfection, bouncing with volume. As she swept into the room, a cloud of expensive floral perfume, gardenia, filled the sterile air, masking the smell of antiseptic. She rushed toward the bed, her hands clasped to her chest, her face arranged into a mask of frantic concern. "Oh, my baby," she cried out. Her voice was pitched perfectly for an audience. "Oh, Savannah, we got here as fast as we could. The traffic was absolute murder." She reached for me, her manicured hands aiming for my face. "Don't," I said. It was not a scream. It was a flat, dull command. She froze. Her hands hovered in the air. She blinked, looking confused, as if a prop on stage had suddenly spoken out of turn. "Savannah, honey," she said, her voice dropping to a soothing, patronizing coo. "You are in shock. It is Mommy. I am here now." "You are here now," Grandpa said from the corner. My mother spun around. She had not noticed him, or perhaps she had chosen not to notice him. "Walter," she said, her smile faltering for a microsecond before she plastered it back on. "I didn't see you there. Isn't this just terrible? We are just sick over it. Absolutely sick." "Where were you?" Grandpa asked. He did not stand up. He did not raise his voice. He sat there like a judge on a bench. "I told you," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Traffic. And the storm. It was unsafe to drive last night. You know how Dean gets with his night vision." She gestured to my father, who was standing by the door. He looked like a ghost. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "Noah called you," Grandpa said. "He called you while Savannah was on the operating table. He begged you to come." My mother let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a nervous sound. "Oh, Noah," she said, glancing at my husband with a look of pity. He was hysterical. You know how men get in emergencies. He was shouting about surgery and life support. We just thought he was overreacting. You know Savannah has always been sensitive. My husband lifted his head from the mattress. He looked at her with a hatred so pure it burned. "Sensitive?" Noah asked. "She was cut open, Linda. She lost blood. Our son is 2 pounds. Well, obviously we know that now," my mother said, smoothing her coat. "But at the time, it sounded like drama. Hospitals always make things sound dramatic to cover their liabilities. We didn't want to rush down here and cause a scene for a fender bender. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for me to join her in this rewritten reality. You understand, don't you, Savannah? We didn't understand the severity. If we had known, we would have been here. You knew, I said. Noah told you? We had a commitment, she snapped, the mask slipping just a fraction. It was a charity gala. People were counting on us. We couldn't just walk out in the middle of the service. It would have been rude. Rude, Grandpa repeated. You thought it would be rude to leave a party to see if your daughter survived. Oh, stop it. Walter, my mother huffed. She walked over to the chair where her purse was and set it down, trying to reclaim the space. You are twisting everything. We are here now. Let's focus on the positive. When can we see the baby? I want to take a picture for the family group chat. Grandpa stood up. The movement was slow, but it commanded the room. You aren't going to see the baby, he said. My mother froze. Excuse me? You aren't seeing the baby, Grandpa said. And you aren't taking any pictures. He picked up the folder. He unzipped it. The sound was loud in the quiet room. What is that? My mother asked, eyeing the leather case with suspicion. This, Grandpa said, is the bill. He walked over to the tray table at the foot of my bed and spread the papers out. The spreadsheet, the bank transfers, the social media screenshots. I had a long talk with Dean this morning, Grandpa said. He told me a lot of interesting things before he went to pick you up. My mother shot a look at my father. If looks could kill, my father would have dropped dead right there on the linoleum. Dean, what did you say? He told me about the medical bills, Grandpa said. Or rather, the lack of them. He picked up a sheet of paper. November 23rd, you requested $3,600 for Dean's heart medication and a specialist copay. Savannah sent it instantly. He picked up another sheet. November 25th, a charge on your credit card for $3,400 at the Sapphire Spa and Resort. He looked at her. That is an expensive cardiologist. Linda. My mother's face went pale beneath her makeup. She stammered, her eyes darting around the room. That was for stress. The doctor said Dean needed to relax. We went there for his health. And the casino? Grandpa asked. Did the doctor prescribe blackjack? Because I see $4,000 in withdrawals at the Riverboat Casino in May. We have expenses, she shouted. You don't know what it costs to maintain a house like ours? We have standing in the community. We can't live like paupers. You spent $460,800 of your daughter's money, Grandpa said. He said the number slowly. Nearly $500,000, while she was eating ramen noodles and working overtime. My mother looked at me. She saw that I wasn't defending her. She saw the ice in my eyes. So she tried the oldest move in the manipulator's handbook. She played the victim. She offered, my mother cried. She threw her hands up. I didn't hold a gun to her head. Savannah is a generous girl. She wanted to help us. She knows how much we sacrificed to raise her. She offered to send that money. She looked at me, her eyes filling with fake tears. Tell him, Savannah. Tell him you wanted to do it. Don't let him shame me like this. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me. I looked at the designer coat I had effectively paid for. I looked at the hair appointment I had funded. I didn't offer, I said softly. You begged. You told me Dad was dying. You told me you would lose the house. You told me not to tell him because he would be ashamed. I never said that, she shrieked. You are remembering it wrong. You always twist things. Stop lying. Linda. The voice came from the door. It was my father. He had stepped forward. His hands were shaking by his sides. He looked terrified, but he was looking at her. Dean, she hissed. Shut up. No, he said. His voice wavered, then strengthened. No, I won't shut up. Not today. He looked at Grandpa. The medical bills were exaggerated. Most of them weren't real. We have Medicare. We have a supplemental plan. The copays are $20. Dean, my mother screamed. We spent it, my father said, tears starting to stream down his face. We spent it on the club membership. We spent it on the trips. We spent it on Talia's studio rent. We spent it on clothes. He looked at me. I knew. Savannah. I didn't know every dollar, but I knew we weren't poor. I knew we didn't need your money to survive. I liked the lifestyle. I liked that Mom was happy. I liked not having to worry. You coward, my mother spat at him. You spineless coward. You enjoyed every minute of it. Don't you dare act like a saint now. I am not a saint, my father said. I am a thief, and so are you. The room fell silent. My mother was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked cornered. Her narrative was crumbling. The story she had told herself, that she deserved this, that she was a good mother, that I was just doing my duty, was dissolving under the harsh light of the truth. And then, the door opened. A nurse walked in. She was holding a clipboard. She looked around the room, sensing the tension, but she had a job to do. Excuse me, she said gently. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to finalize the guardianship paperwork for the NICU. She looked at me. Since you are still recovering and on narcotics, and Dad travels for work, we usually like to have a secondary local contact listed, just in case of an emergency decision if neither of you can be reached immediately. She looked at my parents. Are these the grandparents? It was a simple administrative question. It was a lifeline. It was a chance for my mother to say, yes, put me down. I will be here every day. I will sleep in the chair. I will do whatever is needed. Grandpa watched her. I watched her. Noah watched her. My mother looked at the nurse. She looked at the clipboard. She looked at the reality of what being a guardian meant. It meant showing up. It meant sitting in a quiet room. It meant responsibility without an audience. She smoothed her coat again. She looked at her watch. Well, she said, her voice tight. I don't know if that is a good idea. The nurse blinked. I'm sorry? We have a very busy schedule this month, my mother said. Dean has golf league, I have the garden committee, and Talia is launching her podcast next week. She needs a lot of support. She looked at Noah, her eyes cold. Besides, she said, Noah is the father. He should handle his own family. If we are listed, the hospital will be calling us at all hours. We really need our sleep. Dean has his condition. You know. You are refusing? The nurse asked, her pen hovering over the paper. She sounded shocked. In her line of work, grandparents usually fought to be on the list. We are declining, my mother corrected. It would just complicate our schedule too much. We can't be tied down to a pager. Okay, the nurse said. Her voice was icy. I understand. She made a note on the chart, a big dark mark. She didn't look at my mother again. She turned to me. We will stick with just the parents then. I will let security know. She walked out. The silence that followed was total. My mother looked around, seemingly unaware that she had just detonated the last bridge back to humanity. Well, she said, now that that is settled, Savannah, do you have your checkbook? We actually paid for the parking downstairs, and it was $40. It is ridiculous what they charge here. And since we came to see you, Grandpa slammed his hand down on the tray table. The sound was like a gunshot. Get out, he said. My mother jumped. What? Get out, Grandpa said. And don't you dare ask her for a penny. Not for parking, not for gas, not for a stick of gum. You can't talk to me like that, my mother said, drawing herself up. I am her mother. You are a leech, Grandpa said. His voice turned into that terrifying calm I had only heard about in stories from his time in the service. I have already contacted an attorney, Grandpa said. And I have contacted a family advocate. My mother rolled her eyes. Oh, please, you aren't going to sue us. We are family. I am not suing you, Grandpa said. Yet, he picked up the folder and pointed it at her. But I am telling you this, if you ever come near this hospital again, if you ever ask Savannah for money again, If you ever tell another lie to Sarah or the cousins about Savannah being selfish, I will release this folder." "You wouldn't," my mother whispered. "I will put every bank statement on the internet," Grandpa said. "I will send copies to your bridge club. I will send copies to the country club board. I will send a copy to the pastor at your church. I will show everyone exactly how you funded your standing in the community." My mother gasped. Her social standing was her currency. It was the only thing she valued more than money. "You can't," she hissed. "It is private financial information." "It is my account on the house deed," Grandpa said. "And it is my granddaughter's testimony. It won't be private." He leaned forward. "The next conversations we have won't be private, Linda. They will be public, and they will be humiliating. Do you understand me?" My mother looked at him. She looked at the folder. She saw the end of her reign. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry for forgiveness. She grabbed her purse. "Come on, Dean," she snapped. "We aren't staying where we aren't wanted." She turned on her heel and marched out the door, the click-clack of her heels echoing like gunshots. My father stood there for a second. He looked at me. He looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe "I love you," maybe "I'm sorry," but the habit of obedience was too strong. "Dean!" she shouted from the hallway. He flinched. He looked at me one last time, his eyes full of shame, and then he turned and followed her. The door closed. I let out a breath that felt like it had been held for 8 years. "They're gone," Noah whispered. "Yes," Grandpa said. He sat back down, his hands trembling slightly on the cane. "They are gone." He looked at me. "And they aren't coming back." It took 6 weeks for my son to come home. Those 6 weeks were a blur of beeping monitors, sterile hand sanitizer, and the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your marrow. But finally, the doctors signed the discharge papers. We strapped him into the car seat. He looked so small in it, like a doll in a recliner, and we drove him away from the smell of antiseptic and into the fresh air. Bringing him home felt like exhaling a breath I'd been holding since the accident. A week after we settled in, I decided to host a gathering. Noah thought I was crazy. He asked why I would want to invite people over when we were just finding our rhythm. He asked, specifically, why I would invite them. I told him it was a test. I told him I needed to know, once and for all, if the behavior in the hospital was an anomaly born of panic, or if it was the fundamental architecture of their souls. I needed to see them in my house, looking at the child they had ignored, and I needed to see if there was any humanity left beneath the layers of entitlement. I sent the text to my parents. It was not an invitation. It was a summons with terms and conditions. I wrote that we were having a small welcome home gathering for the baby. I wrote that they could come, but the start time was 2:00, and if they were late, we would not wait for them. I wrote that there was to be no drama, no discussion of finances, and absolutely no guilt trips. And I wrote one final rule, in capital letters. This invitation is for Linda and Dean only. I made it clear, Talia was not invited. I was not ready to see my sister, the woman who posted about her best life while my life was bleeding out. My mother replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. The day of the gathering arrived. It was a Saturday. The house was filled with the smell of roasted coffee and cinnamon. We had invited a few neighbors, 2 of my closest friends from college, and, of course, Grandpa. Grandpa arrived 30 minutes early. He brought a handmade wooden rocking horse he had carved himself in his garage. He sat in the living room, holding my son with a tenderness that made my chest ache, whispering stories to him that he was too young to understand. 2:00 came. My friends were there. The neighbors were there. My parents were not. 2:15 passed. Then 2:30. I felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, the old reflex to make excuses for them. Maybe traffic is bad. Maybe they got lost. But I looked at Noah, and I stopped myself. I did not make excuses. I just noted the time. At 2:45, the doorbell finally rang. I walked to the door, taking a deep breath. I prepared myself to be polite but distant. I opened the door. My mother stood there, She was wearing a pastel yellow dress that looked like it belonged at an Easter brunch. She was holding a store-bought fruit tart. My father stood behind her, looking at his feet, and next to my father, scrolling through her phone. Was Talia? She was wearing oversized sunglasses and looked bored. I stared at them. I blocked the doorway with my body. I said, "Just the two of you," I said. My voice was low, so the guests inside wouldn't hear. My mother laughed, a tinkling, dismissive sound. "Oh, Savannah, don't be silly. It's a celebration. You can't exclude your sister. She is the aunt. After all, we thought it would be a nice surprise." "It is not a surprise," I said. "It is a violation." "Don't be dramatic," Talia said, pulling her sunglasses down to look at me. "I didn't even want to come, but Mom said we had to show a united front. So can we come in? It is hot out here." I looked at them. I could have slammed the door. I could have screamed, but that would have given them the reaction they wanted. It would have made me the hysterical one. "Fine," I said, stepping aside. "You have 1 hour." They walked in. They did not ask where the baby was. They did not ask how I was healing. My mother immediately scanned the room. Her eyes darted over my friends, over the neighbors, and then locked onto the target, Grandpa. He was sitting in the corner armchair, the baby asleep in his arms. My mother's face changed. It wasn't a look of affection. It was the look of a predator spotting a wounded gazelle. She smoothed her dress and made a beeline for him. "Walter!" she exclaimed, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Look at you, holding the baby. Be careful. His neck is fragile." Grandpa looked up at her. His expression was granite. "I know how to hold a baby. Linda, I raised 3 of them." My mother laughed nervously. She hovered around him. She touched his shoulder. She didn't look at my son. She was looking at Grandpa's face, trying to gauge his mood, trying to find an opening for the next 20 minutes. I watched her. I watched her work the room, but her eyes never left Grandpa. She was waiting for a moment to isolate him. Then, the baby started to fuss. "I'll take him," my mother said quickly, reaching out. "I'll take him to the nursery to change him. Grandpa looks tired." "I am fine," Grandpa said. "Nonsense," she said. "Come on. Dad, come with me. You can help me figure out these modern diapers. And Talia, come see your nephew." It was a clumsy maneuver, but Grandpa stood up. He looked at me across the room. I gave him a small nod. I wanted him to go. I wanted to see what she would do when she thought she had him alone. They walked down the hall to the nursery, my mother, my father, Talia, and Grandpa carrying the baby. I stayed in the living room. My friends were chatting near the food table. Noah was refilling drinks. The room was filled with a soft, pleasant hum of conversation. I walked over to the stereo system on the bookshelf earlier that morning. We had set up a new baby monitor. It was a high-tech audio system. We had synced the nursery unit to the Bluetooth speakers in the living room so that if the baby cried while we were watching a movie, we would hear it over the sound system. I had forgotten to disconnect it. I reached out to turn the volume of the music down, intending to put on a different playlist. But as the music faded, a voice filled the living room. It was crystal clear. It was amplified by the surround sound speakers. It was Talia. "Can't live like this. Grandpa, seriously, my card got declined at Starbucks this morning. It is humiliating." The room went silent. My friends stopped talking. The neighbor with the wine glass froze mid-sip. Noah looked at me, his eyes wide. I didn't move. I didn't rush to turn it off. I stood there, my hand hovering over the volume dial. Then my mother's voice came through. It was sharp, urgent, stripped of the public sweetness she had used at the door. "Tell him, Dad," my mother said. "Tell him what we talked about in the car. Walter, you have to fix this. You can't just cut us off cold turkey. It is cruel." I looked around the living room. Every single person was staring at the speakers. They were hearing the private reality of my family broadcast in high definition. Grandpa's voice came next. It was calm, low, and sounded like thunder rolling in the distance. "I didn't cut you off. Linda, you spent the money. It is gone. But the trust, my mother argued. Her voice was rising, shrill and desperate. You can't leave everything to Savannah's kid. Look at this house. Walter, look at the furniture. Savannah is fine. She has Noah. He has a corporate job. They are swimming in money. She worked for this house, Grandpa said. She bought this furniture. But Talia needs it, my mother shouted. Talia is an artist. She is sensitive. She can't work a 9 to 5 like Savannah. It would crush her spirit. You have to reinstate the allowance. Just $3,000 a month. That is all we are asking. Take it out of Savannah's share if you have to. She won't even miss it. The gasps in the living room were audible. My college friend, Jessica, put her hand over her mouth. My neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, who had known my parents for 20 years and always thought they were such nice people, looked like she had been slapped. Take it out of Savannah's share. Those words hung in the air, vibrating through the floorboards. She has a husband to take care of her, Talia's voice whined. Why does she get to have a baby and a house and I get nothing? It isn't fair. You always favored her just because she follows the rules. She doesn't just follow the rules, Grandpa said. She carries the load. And you two have been riding on her back for a decade. We are family, my mother screamed. You are supposed to help family. If you don't fix this, Walter, I don't know what I will do. I can't pay the country club dues next month. Do you want us to be the laughingstock of the town? Do you want people to think we are poor? I want you to be honest, Grandpa said. But I see that is impossible. I am taking the baby, my mother snapped. If you aren't going to help us, you don't get to hold him. Don't you touch him, Grandpa growled. That was the moment I moved. I walked down the hallway. I didn't run. I walked with the steady, heavy tread of an executioner. I pushed the nursery door open. The 4 of them were standing there. Grandpa was holding the baby against his chest, shielding him. My mother was red-faced, her hands balled into fists. Talia was pouting, leaning against the changing table. My father was shrinking into the corner, looking at the floor. They all turned to look at me. My mother immediately composed her face. She forced a smile, though it looked like a rictus of terror. Savannah, she chirped. We were just discussing the best way to swaddle him. Grandpa is being a bit stubborn. I looked at her. Then I pointed to the baby monitor unit on the shelf behind her. The little green light was pulsing steadily. The monitor, I said. My mother looked at it. She looked back at me. She didn't understand. It is synced to the living room speakers, I said. The color drained from her face so fast, it looked like a physical effect. She went stark white. What? She whispered. The speakers, I repeated. In the living room, where all the guests are, where Mrs. Higgins is, where my friends are. I took a step closer to her. They heard everything. Mom, they heard you say, I don't need money because I have a husband. They heard Talia complain about Starbucks. They heard you beg Grandpa to take money out of my inheritance to pay your country club dues. My mother stumbled back. She hit the edge of the crib. No, she gasped. No, they didn't. They did, I said. And so did Dad. I looked at my father. He wasn't looking at the floor anymore. He was looking at me, and there was a strange expression on his face. It wasn't shame this time. It was realization. He had heard her say it out loud. He had heard her say that my value was less than Talia's because I was fine. We need to go out there, my mother stammered. I need to explain. I was joking. They will understand it was a joke. No one is going to believe it was a joke, I said, because it wasn't funny. Talia pushed off the changing table. This is a trap, she yelled. You set this up. You wanted to humiliate us. I didn't set anything up, I said calmly. I invited you here for a welcome home party. I invited you to hold my son. You are the ones who turned it into a negotiation for cash. I walked over to Grandpa and took my sleeping son from his arms. He was heavy and warm and perfect. I turned back to them. I didn't invite you here hoping you would change, I said. My voice was steady, clearer than it had been in years. I knew you wouldn't change. I invited you here to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining the truth. Savannah, please, my mother begged. She reached out a hand. We are desperate. You don't understand. I do understand, I said. I understand that you look at me and see a bank account, and you look at Talia and see a victim, and I understand that you look at this baby and see leverage. I shifted my son to my other shoulder. The party is over, I said. Walk out that door. Walk past the neighbors you were so worried about impressing. Walk past my friends, and don't stop until you are off my property. You can't do this, Talia cried. We are family. No, I said. You are relatives. Family is the people sitting in that living room who would never steal $500,000 from me. I stepped aside. I pointed to the door. My mother looked at me. She looked at the monitor. She looked at the open door leading to the hallway where the silence from the living room was deafening. She knew what was waiting for her out there. It wasn't just judgment. It was the truth. She straightened her spine, trying to summon the last shreds of her dignity. Come on, Talia, she said, her voice brittle. We are leaving. She walked out into the hallway. She had to walk through the living room to get to the front door. I followed them to the edge of the hallway. I watched as my mother walked through the living room. She didn't look left. She didn't look right. She stared straight ahead, her chin high, marching through the gauntlet of silent stares. Mrs. Higgins shook her head as my mother passed. My friend Jessica openly glared. Talia followed, looking at her phone, pretending she wasn't there. My father was the last one. He stopped at the door. He looked back at the nursery where I was standing. He looked at Grandpa. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. A small, sad acknowledgement of a reality he could no longer deny. Then he closed the door behind him. The latch clicked. The room let out a collective breath. Grandpa walked out of the nursery and put his hand on my shoulder. Well, he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I think that clears things up. I looked down at my son. He hadn't woken up. He had slept through the destruction of his grandmother's reputation without stirring. I kissed his forehead. Yes, I said, it certainly does. I walked into the living room, holding my baby, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to apologize for my parents. They had explained themselves perfectly. The fallout from the welcome home party was not an explosion. It was a demolition. It was a controlled, systematic dismantling of the structure my parents had built their lives upon. Grandpa Walter did not wait for the dust to settle. He operates on the principle that some lessons do not deserve slow processing. If you leave a wound open, it festers. If you leave a liar with wiggle room, they will find a way to rewrite the truth. 3 days after my mother walked out of my house through a gauntlet of silent judgment, Grandpa met with his attorney. He invited me to be there, not to sign anything, but to witness it. He wanted me to see the shield being forged. We sat in a conference room with mahogany tables and a view of the city skyline. The attorney, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had known Grandpa for 40 years, laid out the documents. The new structure was brutal in its efficiency. Grandpa signed the papers with a steady hand. The new will stipulated that the entirety of his estate, his house, his savings, his investments, everything that my mother had been banking on to fund her retirement, was being placed into a generation-skipping trust. The primary beneficiary was not me. It was my son. Grandpa looked at me across the table as the pen scratched against the paper. He told me that he knew I could take care of myself. He said he knew I was a survivor, but he wanted to ensure that no matter what happened, no matter how much guilt my mother tried to leverage in the future, my son's education and future would be untouchable. The trust had a specific clause that Mr. Henderson read aloud. It stated that under no circumstances could the funds be accessed by Linda or Dean Phillips, nor could they be used for any expenses related to their housing, debts, or lifestyle. The trustee was not me. It was the bank. Grandpa had removed the burden of saying no from my shoulders. If my mother wanted money from the estate, She would have to ask a corporate officer who did not care about her tears. But Grandpa was not done. He added a condition for my parents regarding the small, existing stipend he had been giving them for years. A stipend I hadn't even known about, which they had been receiving on top of my $4,800. He told the lawyer to rewrite the terms. From this day forward, any financial assistance my parents received from him would require documented accountability. It was the kind of oversight usually reserved for teenagers or recovering addicts. They would have to attend mandatory financial counseling once a month. They would have to submit a budget to Mr. Henderson's office. They would have to show receipts for every expense over $100. And most importantly, they had to agree to a repayment plan for the money they had taken from me. It was not about getting the cash back. We all knew they had spent it on trips and clothes that were now worthless. It was about the principle. Grandpa demanded that $500 be deducted from their stipend every month and deposited into a savings account for my son until the debt was settled. At that rate, it would take them 76 years to pay me back. But the math didn't matter. The daily reminder that they were debtors to their own grandson mattered. Grandpa also took formal steps to protect me. He had Mr. Henderson file legal notices to the credit bureaus to lock down my identity, ensuring my mother could never use my Social Security number to open a card in a desperate panic. He filed a formal letter of record with the family court, detailing the history of the financial abuse, just in case they ever tried to sue for grandparents' rights or claim I was unfit because I cut them off. And then came the final blow to my mother's ego. Grandpa wrote a letter. It was a simple, one-page document addressed to the extended family, to Aunt Sarah, to the cousins in Ohio, to everyone who had believed my mother's lies about me being selfish. He did not send the bank statements. He kept those in reserve. But he wrote that recent events had brought to light that Savannah had been significantly supporting Linda and Dean for 8 years. Contrary to previous family understanding, he wrote that any future requests for money from Linda should be directed to him, not to Savannah, and that the family should be aware that Linda's financial situation was a result of mismanagement, not abandonment. He signed it, folded it, and mailed it. He effectively cleared my name and destroyed hers with a single stamp. My mother tried one last manipulation run a week later. She came to Grandpa's house. She didn't know I was there helping him organize his garage. I heard her voice through the open door. She wasn't screaming this time. She was weeping. It was the soft, broken bird crying that had worked on my father for 30 years. She told Grandpa that he was being cruel. She said she did her best. She said that she only wanted the best for Talia and me, and that she got carried away trying to give us a good life. She tried to rewrite history, claiming that the money I sent was a gift I insisted on, and that she was the victim of a misunderstanding. She said, "Walter, how can you do this to your own daughter? We are flesh and blood." I walked out of the garage then. I was wearing old jeans and holding a box of tools. I looked at her. She looked at me. And for a second, I saw the old spark of calculation in her eyes. She opened her mouth, ready to launch into a speech about how much she missed the baby, about how we needed to put this behind us. But she stopped. She stopped because she looked at Grandpa, and she saw a wall of stone. She looked at me, and she saw a mirror reflecting her true self. There was no audience left to clap for her performance. The theater was empty. Grandpa told her to go home. He told her to bring her receipts for the financial counselor on Monday. She turned around and walked to her car. She looked older. The spring in her step was gone. The weight of the truth was finally settling on her shoulders. And it was heavier than any designer coat she owned. The collapse of my sister Talia's world was faster and less dignified. When the money stopped, when I stopped my transfers and Grandpa locked the estate, the influencer lifestyle evaporated overnight. It turns out that manifesting abundance is very difficult when you cannot pay your cell phone bill. 2 weeks after the party, I saw a post on a local marketplace group. It was Talia selling her high-end camera lens. The caption said, "Changing directions, going minimal." A week after that, she was selling her designer handbags. And a month later, I heard from a friend that Talia had gotten a job. It was not as a creative director. It was not as a visionary consultant. She was working at a retail clothing chain in the mall. She was folding sweaters and standing behind a register, wearing a name tag, making $16 an hour. I went to the mall one day, not to mock her, but to buy clothes for the baby. I walked past the store. I saw her through the window. She was dealing with a difficult customer who was yelling about a return policy. Talia looked tired. She looked humbled. She looked like a real person. For the first time in her life, she was earning her own money. She was standing on her own feet. It was a harsh fall, but it was the only thing that could have saved her from becoming a carbon copy of our mother. My father's transformation was slower, quieter, and more painful to watch. He did not leave my mother. I never expected him to. He was too enmeshed, too dependent on her for his sense of reality. But the dynamic in their house had shifted. He began showing up at my house on Sunday mornings. He would text first, a tentative, polite request, asking if it was okay to drop by. He didn't come inside for long meals. He didn't ask to hold the baby for hours. He would come over and mow my lawn without being asked. He would fix a loose hinge on the back gate. He would bring a casserole that he had cooked himself, burnt on the edges, under-seasoned, but made with his own hands, not bought with my money. One afternoon, he was finishing up raking the leaves in the driveway. I walked out with a glass of iced tea for him. He took it, his hands dirty with soil. He looked at the ground. He told me he was sorry. He didn't make a speech. He didn't try to justify it. He just said he was sorry that he let himself be weak for so long. He said he was going to the financial counseling with Mom. He said he had cut up his credit cards. I looked at him. I loved him. But the trust was gone. It would take years to rebuild. And we both knew it might never be what it was before. I told him thank you for raking the leaves. I accepted his progress without granting him amnesia. I let him be my father, but I would never again let him be my dependent. In the months that followed, I focused on my own house. I opened my banking app, but now, the experience was different. There was no dread. There was no subtraction. The $4,800 that used to vanish every month stayed right where it was. I watched the numbers grow. I built an emergency fund, real emergency savings, not a fund for my mother's imaginary crises. I started a college investment account for my son. Every month, I deposited what used to be my parents' rent into his future. I hired a contractor to fix the roof on our house. I bought a top-rated car seat without guilt. I booked a weekend trip for Noah and me for our anniversary, our first real vacation in 4 years. I used the reclaimed money to buy peace. I realized that stability is not just about having money in the bank. It is about knowing that the floor isn't going to drop out from under you because someone else decided they needed new curtains. The emotional resolution of this story didn't happen in a courtroom or a bank. It happened in my nursery. Late one night, my son was 6 months old. He was healthy, strong, and laughing. I was rocking him to sleep. The house quiet around us. The little wooden horse Grandpa had carved sat in the corner. I looked down at my baby's face, illuminated by the soft glow of the nightlight. I thought about the night he was born. I thought about the silence of my phone. I thought about the empty chair. For a long time, I had mourned the family I didn't have. I had mourned the fantasy of the loving, supportive parents who would rush through a storm to be with me. But as I held my son, I realized I wasn't alone. I had Noah, who had flown across the country and fought for me. I had Grandpa, who had used his last years of energy to build a fortress around us. I had my friends who had stood in my living room and witnessed the truth without looking away. I realized that the family I needed wasn't the one that shared my blood. It was the one that showed up. My parents are still in my life, at a distance. We see them on holidays. We talk about the weather. But the power dynamic is gone. The lever they used to control me, my desire for their approval, has been broken. They are polite now. They are careful. They respect our boundaries because they know the cost of crossing them. And that brings us to the end. People often ask me if my parents changed. They ask if they learned their lesson, if they became better people, if they truly understood the weight of what they did. And I have to be honest, I don't think they changed their hearts. I think if I handed them a check tomorrow, they would take it. I think my mother still believes, deep down, that she was treated unfairly, but their behavior changed. And for me, that is enough. My parents didn't change because they felt guilty. They changed because Grandpa made the truth expensive to ignore. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from right now. Drop a comment below with your city and country, and tell me what time it is there. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please subscribe to the Lucy Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button, and hit the notification bell to help this video get recommended to more people who might need to hear it. Your support means the world to me. Stay strong, and remember to protect your peace.